You know that feeling you get in Spanish class, where it seems like the textbook is only showing you the tip of the iceberg? Well, you are right. Today, we're going way beyond the textbook to explore the real world of Spanish, a world that's wonderfully complex, sometimes totally baffling, and always fascinating. So let's dive in and see what's really going on beneath the surface.
Okay, take a look at this. This is a real headline from a Peruvian newspaper. If you translate it word for word, you get something like, "Thieves suck 3 sticks from crystal." If that makes absolutely no sense to you, don't worry, you're not alone. Even a native speaker from, say, Mexico or Spain would be just as baffled. So what does it actually mean? It means thieves steal 3 million souls from Crystal Brewery. And this is our perfect starting point for just how diverse Spanish really is.
And that headline highlights something so important. Spanish isn't just one single language. The whole idea of a generic Latin American Spanish, it's a huge oversimplification. The reality is, the Spanish you'll hear in Cuba, Colombia, or Argentina can be incredibly different from each other and from the Spanish in Spain, especially when you get into everyday slang and vocabulary.
To really see what I mean, just look at the word chiva. Depending on where you are, it could mean a goat, or a bus, or a blanket, or even a knapsack. It's the perfect example of how one simple word you learn in one country might get you a completely blank stare or something you totally weren't asking for in another.
Now, this complexity isn't just about vocabulary. Oh no, it's woven deep into the grammar itself. So let's start with the secret life of nouns and those tricky rules of gender, a system that is full of patterns and, you guessed it, even more fascinating exceptions.
Every single person who's learned Spanish has had this rule drilled into their head. If a noun ends in a, it's feminine. Simple, right? But is it actually always true? This is probably one of the first big myths we need to bust.
The answer is a big, resounding false. Just look at these super common words, el problema, el dilema, el poema. They all end in a, and yet they're all masculine. A lot of these actually come to Spanish from Greek, which is just a great reminder that in any language, rules are more like helpful guides, not unbreakable laws.
Okay, so here's another great puzzle that trips almost everyone up. We're taught that the word for water, agua, is a feminine noun. So why on earth do we say el agua instead of la agua? It seems like it breaks the most basic rule in the book.
Well, the answer is actually pretty simple and honestly kind of beautiful. It's all about the sound. Saying la agua makes you mash 2 stressed ah sounds right up against each other, and it's just awkward to say. So, for what we call phonetic harmony, Spanish uses el in the singular. But, and this is the key, the noun itself is still feminine. If you add an adjective, it's el agua fria, not frio. It's a rule that was born from the pure rhythm and flow of the language.
All right, let's move on to how grammar can actually be a tool for artists. We're getting away from rigid rules and into real nuance, looking at how simply moving one little word, an adjective, can completely change the meaning of what you're saying.
This right here is the classic example. If you say un gran poeta, you're talking about his talent, his impact. You're making a subjective judgment that he is a great poet. But if you move that same adjective to after the noun and say un poeta grande, the meaning becomes totally literal. You're just saying he's a physically large person. Same words, different order, 2 completely different ideas.
And what this really shows us is that where you place an adjective is an incredibly powerful tool. Putting it before the noun often injects your personal feeling, your subjective opinion. Putting it after tends to be more objective, more descriptive. So in Spanish, grammar itself is a way to express your own unique perspective. And now we get to the 2 biggest mountains every Spanish learner has to climb. The verbs for to be, ser and estar, and the prepositions, por and para. But what if I told you the secret isn't about memorizing endless lists of rules, but about understanding the actual philosophy behind them?
Let's start with ser and estar. Forget the rules for a second. Let's try an analogy. Think of them as 2 different camera lenses you can use to look at the world. One lens gives you that wide, permanent, essential view, and the other zooms in for a temporary, in-the-moment snapshot.
Here's how that plays out. Ser is for the essence of things, what they fundamentally are. Your identity, where you're from, your job, that's the long view. Estar, on the other hand, is for the state or condition, how things are right now. Your location, your feelings, your health. That's the snapshot. So, soy de Mexico is my identity. Estoy en Mexico is just where I happen to be at the moment. It's 2 totally different ways of looking at being.
All right, let's tackle the other beast, por versus para.
If you have ever been frustrated by these two, you are in good company. But the secret, again, isn't about memorization. It's about getting the core idea, the difference between your motivation and your destination.
The key is to think about direction. Por always looks backward. It answers the question, why? It's about the reason, the cause, the motivation for something. Gracias por la ayuda. Thank you because of the help. You're looking back at the cause. Para, on the other hand, always looks forward. It answers what for. It's about the purpose, the goal, the destination. Estudio para aprender. I study in order to learn. That's the future goal. Once you really get that backward versus forward distinction, all those other rules suddenly start to make a whole lot more sense.
So when you put all these different pieces together, you start to see this amazing bigger picture. Spanish isn't just a set of rules in a book. It's this incredibly diverse, living, breathing thing that has subtle rules of sound, meaning, and perspective that actually reflect a way of seeing the world.
And this isn't just about street slang either. Even literary giants, like the famous Argentine writer Jorge Luis Borges, used grammar that would be considered flat-out wrong in Spain. For instance, he'd use phrasing that was common in Argentina. And this wasn't him making a mistake. It was an authentic expression of his own linguistic reality.
And that really is the ultimate takeaway here. All those things we're taught to call exceptions or irregularities in Spanish, they're not flaws. They are the features. They're the signs of a language that is alive and constantly adapting, capable of expressing countless different realities, from a newspaper headline in Peru to a world-famous poem from Argentina. Which kind of leaves us with one last big question to think about. If the grammar of Spanish gives its speakers different lenses for viewing reality, like distinguishing between the essence of something and its current state, or between a motivation and a purpose, how does the structure of your own language shape the way you see the world every single day?